for the new year. And here's a brief comment written by the prolific and distinguished Christian writer, Max Lucado. How many of you have heard of Max Lucado? Oh, very good. Well, that's wonderful. He is called America's preacher. He is very well known, but he's most famous for his writings. He has written almost 100 books. And anyway, Lori Olson, thank you for sending me something from Max Lucado. Yesterday's Dial a Devotion was by Laura Johnson, and she had a quotation from Max Lucado. And Mary Lutke also included something from Max Lucado. He's a wonderful writer. He is very Christian, but he has a gift of words and also to put things together that we don't usually think of putting together. And I'm going to give an example right now. I'm standing up because I'm being filmed.
Oh.
Okay, begin. This is called No Room, and it's from one of the books by Max Lucado called Grace for the Moment. But this is called No Room. Some of the saddest words on earth are, "We don't have room for you." Jesus knew the sound of these words. He was still in Mary's womb when the innkeeper said, "We don't have room for you." And when he was hung on the cross, was the message one of utter rejection? We don't have room for you in our world. Even today, Jesus is given the same treatment. He goes from heart to heart, asking if he might enter. Every so often, he's welcomed. Someone throws open the door of his or her heart and invites him to stay. And to that person, Jesus gives this great promise. In my Father's house are many rooms. What a delightful promise he makes us. We make room for him in our hearts, and he makes room for us in his house. Okay, let's see now. Where am I? Well, in Mary's sermon this morning, she included these words about Jesus Christ that kind of elaborates on what we just heard by Max Lucado. And I'm going to read it with Mary's permission. So great, so complete, so pure was Jesus' witness to God's love that his life became a perfect reflection of God's true nature. He was the one whom Isaiah anticipated. His teachings and his way perfectly disclose God's will. Never before nor since have we had a fuller or truer revelation of God. God's logos, that is God's word, reason, principle of order, meaning, purpose, all God wanted to declare from the very beginning to save the world. He loves. It became flesh and lived among us in Jesus. Jesus' body they crucified until dead, and then they buried it. But his spirit, his truth, the Christ-like nature of God, which was in him and eternal, could never be destroyed. He lives, yet in the gospel accounts, only those who loved him recognized him. And so it is today. My belief in the resurrection rests not upon the reports of an empty tomb, but upon the reality of the living Christ. I know he lives because he lives in the hearts of so many I've been privileged to know. and I also have known his living presence. End of the quotation. And beautiful Mary, would you be so kind as to come up here and to lead our class in the discussion about this important concept of the living Christ?
We thought that there might be time in this class to expand upon this particular concept of what and who Jesus is in our lives. Before I begin that, as I was talking to Kathy and Peggy after the service today, I included some more information about the two women I talked about, and I thought perhaps you'd like to hear some of that. I'll start with Florence Starrow. I mentioned her family. It was years before she found out what happened to them. Her father was killed almost instantly when the Nazis invaded. Her mother and two of her brothers were killed. Two brothers escaped to Canada and became a part of the Canadian Army and came back to Europe as part of the Canadians. Her husband, her 2-year-old little boy were both killed. And her grandparents and her mother-in-law and father-in-law. She didn't know what happened to her 3 sisters. And after she was in a refugee camp in Germany, the Canadians, she and 2 others escaped from Buchenwald, escaped from a train leaving Buchenwald, and were taken to a refugee camp inside Germany. And because Russia entered Poland so quickly, she was advised not to return to Poland to look for her family. And what she did was she went anyhow and went to Krakow and to try to find her sisters. By this time she had seen the list and knew that her 2 brothers, her husband, her son, her father, her mother had all died. And but she didn't know what happened to the 3 sisters. And so she went to Krakow and made her way there by herself. And it was very discouraging. The place was destroyed. There was no organization, and the Russian army was occupying it. So she searched as best she could among the rubble, and one night, in despair, sat down on the steps of one of the few intact buildings that she found. And it was nighttime. And as she sat there, she began to hear a piano being played. And one of her sisters, this was a piece that one of her sisters had liked. So she entered the building, climbed up 2 or 3 flights of stairs, following the sound of the piano, and knocked on the door. And her 3 sisters were there. And they fainted. All of them. They said, "It's a ghost. Florence has come back and she's a ghost." And the 3 women fainted away. And once they came to and were able to be reunited. And so that's, Florence came to the United States. She married again here a man who had been a part of the Polish underground and had escaped the Holocaust. And he was so bitter and so horrified by what had happened. He would never speak of it, and he deeply resented the fact that she was telling her story. It was the first time when she talked to me, the first time she had told anyone what had happened to her. And he tried to disrupt things many times with us because of his own bitterness. Anyhow, she has gone to a better place now. But go ahead.
About her baby. What did she know about the baby?
The baby and her husband both were killed almost immediately upon being taken, as far as they could find. Never found again. So it was, really quite a thing that happened to all of those Polish Jews taken almost immediately into the Holocaust system. And then B. Whittlesey lived in Laguna Beach for many years of retirement. But I should tell you something about her youth. She graduated from UC Berkeley, but while she was a student there, on a hike, she fell and injured her knee, and somehow they decided to put a huge cast on that leg, and it stayed on for quite a long time, and she began to experience more and more pain. And finally, it was so intense, they removed it and found gangrene. And so they told her she would die by morning unless they amputated the leg. And she said, that's no life for me. I don't want a life without the leg. Forget it. And so they didn't amputate, and so she lived to be 93. Traipsing all over the earth, climbing mountains everywhere. Anyhow, I told you she was a tough, no-nonsense lady. So, anyhow, those are the rest of those stories of those two women that we were published. Now, the other thing about Bee Whittlesey, I told them, it was her niece that wanted us to tell her story, because she, again, had never told anyone. And so I arrived the first day to talk to her, and she had a little piece of paper with 3 paragraphs, and she said, well, I'll read this to you. So she did, and she said, well, that's it. And I said, what do you mean? You're 93 years old. You just told me in 3 paragraphs. Well, we ended up, I think, about 20 hours together, and sitting out on her patio overlooking the ocean. It was a wonderful experience. She was a really interesting person, and was a great advocate of women's rights, was very active in a lot of women's rights groups in Laguna Beach. And I think that this definition of Jesus would have suited her very well. She would have been in agreement with something that makes this much sense. At least it makes a lot of sense to me, to have this kind of definition of Jesus. But we want to hear what you have to say about.
I don't know what more. Did she say anything more about her 24 hours on the trip?
She would never tell me. She would never tell me anymore. I had to completely fill that in. But she did say, and Don used this at her memorial service because we attended that service, because she was a school teacher, when she talked about death, she said, well, it's just like graduation. I'm just going to move from one room to the next. She said, there's nothing to be afraid of about that. She said, I'm just going to graduate. And that was part of her faith. The other interesting story about her happened, this tells more about her mother, which was a big influence in her life. They had a home up by the Wawona in Yosemite, the Wawona Hotel. Yeah. They had a home near there. And they would go up there in the summertime. And she had a sister and a brother, I guess. There were 3 children. Anyhow, they're there one summer, and it's a summer storm in the mountains. And you know what summer storms can be like high in the Sierras. It was violent. It was lightning and thunder, and it was terrible. And the 3 children were sitting on the sofa, kind of shaking. And the mother said, okay. She walked over and she threw open the windows and she said, come over here. I want to show you something beautiful. And that was the lightning and the thunder. And that was the spirit of her mother that she liked to have as a part of her life. But imagine that reaction. Everyone's afraid and the mother is opening the windows. And it was a great moment in her life. Okay, back to the quote about Jesus, and comments from any of you on what you think about who was and is Jesus. I mean, this is you know, we call ourselves Christians because of what he was and is.
I like the part about he lives in me, and he's not, you know, he's not some historical being that I know that he did live on the earth and all of that, but the main part is that he came to live in me and is a part of me, and he's still alive, and I...
You have a story about that, don't you, Joe? Wasn't that a moment for you of the presence?
Yes, when I was a little girl, just
Yeah.
9 years old, and I was going to play with my cousins down the road a little way out in the country, and I was right where our garden gate was, and I was about to that point.